If you want to hear a story about the height of kleptocracy, or maybe better said, the depths of cronyism currently in charge of our country, this is the story for you. Donald Trump has confirmed that he wants to host next year's G7 summit at his own Doral Golf Club in Miami, Florida. This would be completely unconstitutional, and this is not my opinion, it's the opinion of legal and political experts, because there's this thing called the Emoluments Clause. Asked why he wants to do this, this is hilarious, Donald Trump said, well, it's convenient because it's close to Miami Airport. Check out a visibly sweaty, sniffing, and confused Trump making the case for this after arguing with a reporter about what counts as a question, and then making himself a martyr for willing to be president of the United States. Take a look.
Here we go.
I actually have a question for you on next year's G7 summit, but can I just clarify something you said? You mentioned earlier today.
One question. Go ahead.
Let me do the clarification and then I'll get to the question.
No.
You talked about
One
calls
question.
with China and a breaking news alert. I'm trying to understand what specifically you heard from China. And on next year's G7, you alluded today, dropped several hints about Miami, about Doral, and hosting next year's G7 at your property. What reassurances, if any, can you give the American people that you are not looking to profit off the presidency?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've spent, and I think I will, in a combination of loss and opportunity. Probably it'll cost me anywhere from $3 to $5 billion to be president. And the only thing I care about is this country. Couldn't care less, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. People have asked me, what do you think it costs? And between opportunity, not doing things, I used to get a lot of money to make speeches. Now I give speeches all the time. You know what I get? Zippo, and that's good. And I did a lot of great jobs and great deals that I don't do anymore, and I don't want to do them because the deals I'm making are great deals for the country, and that's to me much more important. Doral happens to be within Miami. It's a city. It's a wonderful place. It's a very, very successful area of Florida. It's very importantly only 5 minutes from the airport. The airport's right next door. It's a big international airport, one of the biggest in the world. Everybody that's coming, all of these people with all of their big entourages come. It's set up so, and by the way, my people looked at 12 sites, all good, but some were 2 hours from an airport, some were 4 hours from, I mean, they were so far away. Some didn't allow this or they didn't allow that. With Doral, we have a series of magnificent buildings. We call them bungalows. They each hold from 50 to 70 very luxurious rooms.
Trump also very interested in racking up minibar revenue during the G7. That's why he wants Russia back in. Putin's entourage will show up to Doral in the new G8, and they will just owe Trump tons of money because of all the vodka consumption. I mean, this is just so stupid and so illegal, completely unconstitutional. This would violate the Emoluments Clause against a government official self-enriching by virtue of being in office. If Donald Trump was not president, there would be no discussion of holding a G7 at a Trump golf club. This is a way in which Donald Trump is self-enriching by virtue of being president of the United States, or potentially self-enriching. Trump constantly sends signals to foreign officials about where should they spend their money. Trump has already racked up endless violations of the Emoluments Clause, and this would be another one. And the thing with Trump is, maybe it's a good thing compared to corruption behind closed doors, although there's plenty of that with Trump. With Trump, a lot of the corruption is out in the open. I'm wondering, is it possible that doing the corruption and the cronyism out in the open helps Trump get away with it in some way? If the G7 was at some secret location and later it turned out that it was Doral or Mar-a-Lago, maybe that leads to more outrage and consequences than Donald Trump just saying straight up at my golf club. For all of the kowtowing to and praying to the altar of the Constitution, though, I would love to just hear Republicans say, this can't happen. This can't happen. But even though they fetishize the Constitution, it's actually a lot like the Bible for them. We've talked about how a lot of Republicans are all about the Bible, but not really. They're all about the parts that are convenient for them. Something about abortion. Something about gay marriage because man lying with another man or whatever. Otherwise, who cares when the Bible is not convenient for you? They similarly claim to be all about the Constitution, but it's only certain parts, right? The Second Amendment and their complete misinterpretation of it, that they are definitely in favor of for sure. The First Amendment, for people they agree with, absolutely. The Emoluments Clause, that sounds like something that should only apply to Democratic presidents. And I'll tell you this, if Trump wants to do the G7 next year at Doral or Mar-a-Lago or whatever, he will probably get away with it. The way it will go down is we'll hear it's about to happen for month after month after month. Outrage, panels, debates. Then it will happen, even though legal experts say, oh yeah, this is clearly illegal. It'll be a week of corporate media panels about, is this impeachable? Is it not impeachable? Blah, blah, blah. Legal experts, again, will continue to be united and say, yeah, this is illegal. Then Trump will threaten to nuke a tropical storm or something, and everybody will move on and forget about it, and he'll get away with it like he's gotten away with everything else. Fiasco after fiasco. Cronyism, swamp filling, worldwide embarrassments. The media outrage cycle chases it for their own benefit. And then we move on to something else when Trump says, let's bomb a hurricane or send people back to S-hole countries or whatever. And there's a very good chance, I hate to tell you this, there's a good chance this is not going to end in January of 2021 with the inauguration of a Democratic president. There is a good chance, and we need to recognize it, and we need to prepare mentally for it, because I don't want to see the crying on November whatever 2020, if and when this happens. There's a good chance this is going to go on until January of 2025, when Donald Trump will be 78 years old and will be completing 8 years as president of the United States. Be prepared, buckle up, because it may well be happening. That is sort of the bulk wrapping up our G7 coverage yesterday and today. It has been an extraordinary embarrassment. Half the country thinks that it was some major alpha male victory of some kind for Donald Trump. But anybody who understands sort of how the world works and basic geopolitics and diplomacy understands that this was truly the height of embarrassment for our country. Make sure you follow the David Pakman Show on Instagram, at David Pakman Show. We will have a poll and other content related to the G7. And while you're there, follow me at david.pakman. I have posted a video to my Instagram of a Portuguese dog. Now, I don't mean a Portuguese water dog. I'm not talking about the breed. I'm talking about a dog from Portugal named Pulga, which means flea in Spanish, or presumably in Portuguese as well, I'm guessing, who watches the David Pakman Show. Okay, there is a Portuguese dog that watches the David Pakman Show daily, and I have a video of that dog on my Instagram at david.pakman. Follow me there. We'll take a quick break. Much, much more after this. I actually have some good news for you today. Farmers are furious with Donald Trump. Now, the reason that they're furious is not good, which is they're getting crushed, absolutely destroyed by Donald Trump's tariffs and Trump's pointless, fruitless, endless trade war. But the fact that the farmers are now correctly blaming Trump for what Trump did is a good thing. Trump's lies often work, and frequently they go unpunished. We have in front of us step one in Donald Trump actually suffering the consequences, or suffering some consequences from his lies, which is that farmers are identifying them as lies. This is step one. Step one is acceptance. Donald Trump's tariffs have led to massive drops in a number of agricultural exports: soybeans, pork, wheat, a number of other farm exports. Now, the administration has tried to sort of make up for this by subsidizing farmers, which sounds a lot like the socialism that Donald Trump claims to be against. But okay, anyway, it's not been enough. Farm bankruptcies are climbing. Farmers are buying less and less farm equipment, so the manufacturers of the farm equipment are starting to suffer. The problems are trickling up, so to speak, and Donald Trump's subsidies just aren't cutting it. Donald Trump has now straight up started lying and saying farmers are doing great again. It's not true, but much like the China phone call that never happened, Trump realizing that things aren't going well with the trade war and saying, don't worry, China's desperate to figure this out. They've called me to start trade talks. Of course, they haven't. There was no such phone call. Donald Trump is simply saying, things are going great for farmers now. And fortunately, the farmers are actually pushing back. And the farm groups are saying, no, things are not going well. Quote from Brian Thalman, who is the president of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. There are dozens and dozens of these groups. Brian Thalman saying, we're not starting to do great again. Things are going downhill and downhill quickly. Will they vote as a result of that? We don't know, but at least they've correctly identified that Donald Trump is lying. The National Farmers Union says Donald Trump's tariffs are making things, quote, worse, not better. Will they vote on the basis of that understanding? We don't know. More and more individual farmers like Bob Coylan are saying, I'm doing terribly since Donald Trump came into office, and it's getting worse and worse. So that's all good. This is just what we call step one. Then it gets to where the rubber meets the road. Will these farmers vote for a Democrat in 2020? Will they stay home? We heard from this same farmer, Bob Coylan, to CNN, quote, if he doesn't lose, he being Trump, if Trump doesn't lose 100% of it from the farm belt, then people are kind of crazy because this is not going well for farmers at all. Are farmers going to vote for someone else? Are lifelong Republican farmers in the Midwest going to vote for a Democrat in 2020? I hope the answer is yes, but I don't know. And this is something I've been talking about for a long time. Just because a lifelong Republican is displeased with what Donald Trump is doing or with some aspect of what Donald Trump is doing doesn't mean they're going to vote for a Democrat. Now, that's okay, and I'll explain that in a moment. We actually had a phone call, a couple phone calls from Trumpists who say, I don't like that Trump hasn't built the wall. And I asked them, it was Doug from Jamul, in fact, I remember. I said to Doug, okay, if Trump doesn't build the wall by 2020, are you not voting for him? And he said, well, no, I mean, okay, I probably still would. And more than likely, the reason he won't build the wall if he doesn't is because of Democrats standing in the way or whatever. So it's really important to understand that any dissatisfaction you hear from these lifelong, reliable Republican voters with Donald Trump, it doesn't mean they're going to vote for someone else. But here's the upside. Even if they just stay home on election day, it's not a bad thing, assuming that the left can get our base out to vote in November of 2020. Because let's be very, very honest about this. If they haven't decided not to vote for Trump in 2020 by now, they're either voting for Trump or maybe staying home. With most of them, the best we can hope for is that they stay home. And that's okay because they're not going to vote for a Democrat. But the reason why this is all okay, and we shouldn't worry too much about these farmers not voting for a Democrat, is that national elections are not won by convincing people on the other side to vote for your person in large numbers, right? There cannot really be an election where 130 million people vote, or whatever the number is, flipped by arguing with people and changing their minds when half the country doesn't vote. It's about getting out the vote, and then we'll accept anything that depresses vote on the right or splits the opposition vote. So I talked earlier this week, Trump has a primary challenger, former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh is running in the primary. Maybe he will eventually run as an independent. Will some angry farmers in the Midwest maybe opt to vote for Joe Walsh or stay home as a result of that? That would be fine. We would gladly accept that. Maybe a few percent of the national Republican electorate that isn't pleased with Trump will choose to stay home. They're not going to vote for a Democrat, but they won't vote at all. That still helps us. As long as we get our base out, this is the path to a win. And these farmers, even if they don't vote, can be a part of turning what was in 2016, an election that ultimately was decided by 75,000 or so votes in 3 states. Just a few farmers staying home in combination with us getting our base out can actually make a difference. Maybe some of them will actually go and vote for the Democratic nominee. I don't know, but we don't need them to do that is the point. I told you before our vacation last week that our friend J.D. Scholten is once again challenging incumbent, disgusting Republican Steve King in Iowa's 4th District in 2020. We met J.D. Scholten down at Netroots Nation in August of 2018. He ran against Steve King in 2018 and lost by only 3 points. Very sad because it would have been amazing to knock off one of the most vile and despicable members of Congress. King is in trouble, and J.D. Scholten is running. King has said crazy things about abortion. King has reminisced about when white supremacy and white nationalism weren't offensive, saying to the New York Times during an interview, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? But King is in trouble. Republicans have abandoned him, and he has almost no money. This is so funny. King hasn't received one donation from a PAC associated with an existing member of Congress. This is a common way that these guys fund each other. Corporate PACs aren't donating to Steve King. Special interest groups aren't donating to Steve King. In the first 6 months of this year, King received two donations from third-party political entities. One was from Lamar Smith, a Lamar Smith associated PAC, former Republican congressman, and $2,000 from Todd Akin. Todd Akin is the guy who said that the body shuts down a legitimate rape and thus the woman can't get pregnant. That guy is saying, I want to donate $2,000 to Steve King. Republican Party groups are also not donating. So this guy can be defeated. Think back to 2018. J.D. Scholten lost by only 3 points in 2018. Back when Steve King was still able to raise money. This guy, Steve King, is someone who came to power as a tool of big business, quite frankly. He came to power because the bankers gave him money. He came to power because big builders and companies like AT&T and Big Food gave him money. Big Insurance gave Steve King money. They're not giving him money this year. And that's really, really bad for Steve King. So as usual, there's the good and the bad. The good news is that without money, he can more easily lose to J.D. Scholten. The bad, or at least the troubling part, is how did it take until 2020 to realize for Republicans that they need to abandon this guy? And the answer is they don't really care. They're playing now like they're so disgusted with the things that Steve King has said. No, this is the same Steve King that's been around all along. And while this wasn't a problem for them, King was another vote in the House, and that's why they wanted it. It's not that he was someone that they disagreed with or agreed with or whatever. They were indifferent. They just want someone to check a box and say, yes, I'll vote Republican. Now he's become a PR problem, so they're abandoning him. Let's not attribute to morality and ethics what we can attribute merely to Republicans seeing politics as sport, wins and losses, checking boxes, and that's it. But he needs to go. Hopefully he will in 2020. Check out J.D. Scholten's campaign. J.D. is a former professional baseball player, super nice guy, hung out with him in 2018 in New Orleans, as I mentioned. He came so close in 2018 with the loss of Steve King's funding and the abandonment that Steve King is suffering from his Republican Party colleagues. This could be an amazing time to get a Democrat in the Iowa 4th Congressional District. Check it out. Check out J.D. Scholten, and hopefully we'll be talking to him on the program. We'll take a quick break. After this, we have extraordinarily great submissions for the David Pakman Show EDM dubstep voicemail remix theme song. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then I think you're going to like it even more. I have some really strange video for you today. It has been just embarrassing anecdote after embarrassing anecdote from the G7 in France for Donald Trump over the last few days. And I really want to do this thoroughly, and that's why the entire show so far has been G7 related stuff. Donald Trump's only notable contribution to the G7, as I mentioned before, has been ruining a dinner with world leaders by insisting that Russia be added back into the G7 to once again make it the G8, which it used to be until 2014. He's contributed no ideas to better the planet. He skipped the climate change meeting. He's made no sense in almost everything he said. But the sort of height or the bottom of this embarrassing fiasco was Donald Trump's explanation of why he wants to add Russia to the G7. Now, I'm going to play the clip for you. It's under 90 seconds in duration. But in the clip, Trump attacks Obama on foreign soil, a bad look for presidents, says things that are just straight up wrong, which is not probably a shock to you, and seems to suggest that Russia should be back in the G7 because Putin took Crimea from Ukraine while Obama was president. I know that that doesn't seem to make any logical sense because it doesn't make any logical sense, but it seems to be what Donald Trump is saying. Let's take a look.
They were really, it was a President Obama. I'm not blaming him, but a lot of bad things happened with President Putin and President Obama. One of the things that happened was, as you know, what happened with a very big area, a very, very big and important area in the Middle East where the red line was drawn, and then President Obama decided that he was not going to do anything about it. You can't draw red lines in the sand. You just can't do it. And the other was in Ukraine, having to do with a certain section of Ukraine that you know very well, where it was sort of taken away from President Obama. Not taken away from President Trump, taken away from President Obama. President Obama was not happy that this happened because it was embarrassing to him, right? It was very embarrassing to him. And he wanted Russia to be out of what was called the G8. And that was his determination. He was outsmarted by Putin. He was outsmarted. President Putin outsmarted President Obama. Wait a minute. And I can understand how President Obama would feel. He wasn't happy, and they're not in for that reason. Now, I'm only thinking about the world, and I'm thinking about this country in terms of the G7, whether it's G7, G8. I think it would be better to have Russia inside the tent than outside the tent.
Why doesn't Trump name anything? An important area with a red line, Syria, a certain section of Ukraine that you know well, Crimea. Putin took Crimea, not from Trump, but from Obama. Therefore, Trump wants Putin back in the G7. So I'm trying to read between the lines here. I think maybe what Donald Trump is saying is that Obama screwed up with Russia. Russia took Crimea from Ukraine under Obama's watch. This embarrassed Obama, or it angered Obama, so Obama retaliated by unfairly kicking Russia out of the then G8. And that's a silly reason to have Russia out, so Trump wants them back in. Basically, what Trump seems to be trying to articulate in a completely failing way is Obama wanted Russia out, and I do the opposite of Obama, so bring Russia back in. Now, there are so many logical contortions or pretzels here. One is not everything that happens while someone is president is their fault. Like, is it Donald Trump's fault or responsibility that Argentina's economy is crashing even more right now? It's not. It's happening while Trump is president, but not because Donald Trump is president. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that Trump sort of seems to be saying, since Putin outsmarted Obama and took Crimea from Ukraine under Obama's watch, he doesn't deserve any punishment for it. And getting kicked out of the G8 was Obama's way of punishing him for it, or something like that, which is bizarre. And then also remember that Russia was suspended from the G8 after annexing Crimea on the vote of all of the other G8 members, period. There are many criticisms that we can make of the G8 or the G7, which are valid. Number one, they're not doing nearly enough to fight climate change. That's a very significant and prescient criticism of the G7. They are perpetuating the status quo of damaging neoliberal globalization rather than limiting it. That is a fair and accurate critique of the G7. They are lacking buy-in from some major industrialized countries, more like what you see in the G20. But this is not only childish nonsense that Donald Trump is adding I'm calling it a critique, although to call it that stretches credulity significantly. It also is not even really adding to the serious critiques that there are of the G7 and of the ways in which these seven or the broader G20 nations control so many aspects of the everyday lives of so many people on this planet. And it's just, it's a waste of time. It's a diplomatic embarrassment. And it's a geopolitical embarrassment, quite frankly, for Americans who have to, if they understand what's going on. I know the Trumpists defend everything that the guy does, but if you understand what's going on, you see the U.S. embarrassed day after day, press conference after press conference by Donald Trump. And the sort of height of this is what I want to talk about next, which is that Donald Trump wants the next G7 at one of his golf clubs. Trump has been touting a 51% approval rating from some very specific right-leaning pollsters. But the reality is that Donald Trump's approval rating has dropped to its lowest in 2019, which is 36%. This is looking at one poll that has been done over time. It's the Associated Press poll. It's been tracking Trump's approval for his entire presidency. And right now, Trump's approval is 36%. His disapproval is 62%. So let's contextualize this. Let's explain why it matters. And then let's talk about how it relates to 2020. First of all, the context. Trump's approval has been in the range of 32 to 42 in the Associated Press poll since day one. So it didn't go lower than 32% approval. It's never been higher than 42% approval. That's a small range of only 10 points. That one thing that relates to is the hyper partisanship and polarization in the United States politically. We've talked about that before. Right now, Trump is at 36. That's pretty close to the middle of that 32 to 42 range, a little bit on the lower end. And that ties the lowest approval of 2019. So is this some kind of breaking news that changes everything, Trump approval at 36? Well, not in the sense that Trump is in the middle of the approval range that he's had all presidency. Secondly, some partisan context. If you look at Democrats, 95% disapprove of Trump. Republicans approve 79%, and independents approve 65%. That's an important number, the 79% that Republicans approve. This is important because Trump's been touting, and Republicans have been leaning on, Trump has 95% approval among Republicans. I don't know what poll that is. This is a good poll that we're looking at, and it says, hold on a second, 79% of Republicans approve of Trump. This matters in the context of a primary challenger, which now Donald Trump has in former Congressman Joe Walsh, and I'll be talking about that later in the show. 95% approval from your party and 79% approval from your party are two very different things. And in a primary, the goal of which would be not to defeat Donald Trump in the primary, it's not going to happen, but to do some damage to Trump, that is going to be significantly influenced by the difference between Republicans approving of Trump 79% versus 95%. So that's important. Also important, there are three areas where Republicans actually disapprove of Trump's handling more than they disapprove of him overall. So again, remember, 79% of Republicans approve of Trump. However, only 77% think he's handling healthcare correctly. Only 75% say he's handling foreign policy correctly, and only 70% believe he's handling gun policy correctly. This is important and it's interesting, but Republicans are not going to vote for a Democrat because they disagree with Trump on these issues. This is important to understand. For Democrats, gun policy isn't a voting issue, by and large. For Republicans, gun policy can be a voting issue if you are on the wrong side of more guns in more places. But the reality is, if you're a Republican and you don't love Trump's take on guns, you're not going to go and vote for a Democrat over that. That's the reality. Healthcare. A lot of these Republicans, 25% of them, they might recognize Trump is completely bungling healthcare, but they're not going to go and vote for a so-called socialist healthcare plan from a Democrat. They're still going to vote Trump. They just don't like what he's doing on healthcare. Similarly, foreign policy. Foreign policy is just not a voting issue in the way that domestic economic issues are. So that gets us to, what do we do with this data? Whether it's 36% approval or 32% approval, or even in the 20s, Donald Trump can still win re-election. I've run the numbers before with you. Half the country doesn't vote. You could have a 26% approval and turn out 1% more voters in some key states than the other party and win because half the country doesn't vote. So following Donald Trump's approval is relevant, and it helps us to understand how people, especially Republicans, are reacting to Trump. It does not tell us anything about what's going to happen in 2020. All you need to know is that Donald Trump could have a 36% approval rating and easily win. And by the way, the fact that he has a 36% approval rating tells us that there are tens of millions of people who are so disconnected from reality or ideologically blinded that they don't care what happens in the real world. They are voting for Trump in 2020, period. Okay? Trump has tens of millions of votes in 2020 already. It's August of 2019. The election's in November of 2020. Trump has tens of millions of votes. Once you know that, you realize this becomes get out the vote, because we're not going to be able to convince these people in any large numbers. I know I'm a broken record at this point. I've been talking about this for so long. This is going to be about get out the vote. That needs to be our priority in our context heading into 2020. Tell me if you think there is some other way in which Trump's approval is relevant beyond reminding us he's got tens of millions of votes in the bank already, and we've got to get the vote out. Follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/David Pakman Show. And I have a new story on my Instagram page, david.pakman. Got back from vacation. Big developments with my tomato plants. Huge developments. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at instagram.com/David.Pakman. I have a clip for you today of right-wing pundit Ben Shapiro, which may be his dumbest ever. And I know that that is saying a lot. Shapiro is known for employing a technique of speaking quickly and confidently, which to some people gives the idea that he knows what he's talking about, but he often says really silly things. Quick reminder, here he is talking with me about gun control when I interviewed him a few years ago, and it didn't really take that much to get him visibly confused.
It's a very simple argument from my point of view, and that is that people, if they have the right to bear arms in order to prevent tyranny, then that goes for arms to prevent, that goes to the ultimate limit of that is the arms necessary to prevent, basically you can own any arm that is necessary, not to prevent tyranny.
Anyway, make sure you check out that entire interview. But let's talk about Ben's latest comment. The latest comment is America has already apologized for slavery. The Civil War was a national apology for slavery.
1619, as folks are calling it, is a massive retelling of the American story with African Americans appropriately at its center. It is the kind of retelling that continues putting the calls for reparations in their proper context and makes the absence of a national apology all the more galling. So, in other words, it backs Jonathan Capehart's agenda. There was a national apology for slavery. It was called the Civil War, where 700,000 Americans died. So that seems to have been kind of important in American history.
This may be the dumbest thing he said. There is no interpretation in which this makes sense. There was a national apology for slavery called the Civil War, where 700,000 Americans died. The Civil War was not an apology for slavery. The Civil War was only necessary because half the country was willing to die to keep slavery. Who apologized? Someone who does the fighting to keep slavery is not apologizing for slavery. Someone who dies fighting for the Union, trying to abolish slavery, is not apologizing for slavery. They're not even defending it. How could they possibly be apologizing for it? This makes no sense under any circumstances. And I'm having trouble understanding whether Ben Shapiro doesn't understand history or doesn't understand slavery or doesn't understand the definition of apology, or maybe some combination of the three. If the South was apologizing for slavery, why did they put up endless monuments to Civil War generals who were fighting for slavery? That's not usually how apologies work. And so what you have to understand is that Ben Shapiro serves a role in right-wing media, and he plays a character in right-wing media. The character he plays is the facts and logic guy, but really it's just his delivery that may give people that impression, not the content of what he says. The role he plays is the intellectual right-winger who provides rock-solid arguments for right-wingers to feel good about their incorrect and immoral positions. And that's how you end up believing that single payer is some form of slavery against doctors, and yet actual slavery is bad, but the U.S. has already apologized for it by having a civil war. Now, there is maybe a silver lining here. Some of you probably are anticipating this. He seems to be admitting that the Civil War was about slavery. That's sort of an accomplishment, because very often right-wingers love to say, Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. States' rights, of course, to own slaves. But he's actually saying that it seems to have been about slavery, and I think that that is actually an accomplishment in some way, shape, or form, maybe some kind of progress. I do get scared when people call into this show and they say, David, I'm on the left and I love what you do, but I like to hear strong, reasoned arguments from the right, so I listen to Ben Shapiro. That's scary stuff, and we should all be very scared when we hear people say that. There are things a president can do that we just think are the wrong policy. And there are things presidents sometimes do that make us question the entire democratic process. And I'm punching my mic already because I'm so fired up about this, that got the president elected in the first place. Today is one of those. Donald Trump has suggested multiple times that we should bomb hurricanes to stop them. It sounds like a satirical news headline. It sounds like a joke, but it's the suggestion not of a random 73-year-old guy that you just saw urinating underneath the subway platform. These are the words of a 73-year-old guy who happens to be president of the United States, and the White House is not denying it. Here's a paraphrased quote. This is the stuff of horrors. I got it. Why don't we nuke them? Trump said. They start forming off the coast of Africa. As they're moving across the Atlantic, we drop a bomb inside the eye of the hurricane and disrupt it. Why can't we do that? Per Axios, who is reporting on this, asked how the briefer reacted to Trump's suggestion. The source says that the briefer said to Trump, "Sir, we'll look into that." They're placating Trump. This is how it works behind the scenes. Trump says, what about bombing or nuking hurricanes? And they say, "Sir, we're going to take a look into that." Trump reiterated the suggestion that the government can intervene with bombs against hurricanes before they make landfall multiple times. And listen, Trump seems to think he knows a lot about nukes, right? Remember this beauty?
Having nuclear, my uncle was a great professor and scientist and engineer, Dr. John Trump at MIT. Good genes, very good genes, okay? Very smart. The Wharton School of Finance, very good, very smart. You know, if you're a conservative Republican, if I were a liberal, if I ran as a liberal Democrat, they would say I'm one of the smartest people anywhere in the world. It's true. But when you're a conservative Republican, they try, do they do a number? That's why I always thought of went to Wharton, was a good student, went there, did this, built the, I have to give my credentials all the time because we're at a little disadvantage. But you look at the nuclear deal, the thing that really bothers me, it would have been so easy, and it's not as important as these lives are. Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought?
Yeah, so that was all one sentence, by the way. The briefer in another case, when Donald Trump suggested bombing hurricanes, was reportedly, quote, knocked back on his heels, and that it became so quiet in the room that you could hear a gnat fart in the meeting, according to a source that spoke to Axios. Trump has reportedly brought this idea up multiple times with the Department of Homeland Security, with national security officials, with a senior administration official. Asked about this, the White House is not denying it. They said, "We don't comment on private discussions that the president may or may not have had with his national security team." That's an admission that this was suggested by Trump, okay? In the world of politics, if you are presented with something completely ridiculous that of course didn't happen, like, hey, we heard Donald Trump suggested going out and personally murdering people in the streets. Like Trump wants to go out and shoot some people. Is that something Trump said? You would immediately have multiple officials saying, absolutely ridiculous. The reporting is false. Never said it. Absolutely ridiculous. They said something here that's almost as crazy. Why don't we bomb hurricanes? And the White House is saying, we don't comment on what the president did or didn't say. And there's another administration official who's actually defending the idea, saying that, quote, Donald Trump's goal is simply to keep catastrophic hurricanes from hitting the mainland, which is a good goal to have. This is a defense of the idea of bombing hurricanes that Donald Trump has suggested multiple times. So let's go through it. Trump's not the only person to think of this idea, okay? Back during the Eisenhower era, it was considered, we knew a lot less at the time, is it possible that we could use these new bombs that we made to disrupt hurricanes? 70 years ago, however long ago it was. Scientists agree it just won't work, period. The only disagreement that exists with this story is, did Trump suggest bombing or did Trump suggest nuking the hurricanes? So bombs, non-nuclear weapons versus nuclear weapons. There are reports of both. That's the only disagreement that really exists here. Now, it's also kind of interesting that in the background of this, once again, it's always near non-white people that Trump is thinking of dropping the bombs, right? Like, I get this is probably just a coincidence, but Trump is thinking, let's bomb the hurricanes where they form near Africa. Maybe coincidental, but just sort of notable nonetheless, given how this administration has been run. If Trump were a family member or a friend, if you cared about him, if Trump was a personal contact, you would have staged an intervention by now and you would have gotten the person some help. How did we elect someone this stupid or unhinged? And then the answer is, well, because 60 million people thought this was a good idea. And that basically tells you everything you need to know about the American electorate. This is a crisis. The crisis is Trump, but the crisis is also that there are tens of millions of people who are going to enthusiastically vote to reelect the guy in November of 2020. Ultimately, this is going to be a get out the vote election. And that relates to what I want to talk about next. So yesterday, Donald Trump unleashed a multi-tweet tirade against Fox News. And we can now say that Donald Trump has fully turned on Fox News exactly as I predicted months ago. First, I'll tell you what Donald Trump said yesterday. Then we'll go back to how this has been building for a while now. Donald Trump is furious that Fox News even had Democrats on their channel saying that it's time to look for something else, and also saying a lot of other bizarre and completely just unintelligible things. So let's take a look. Trump tweeting in a 3-tweet tweetstorm yesterday, quote, "Just watch Fox News heavily promoting Democrats through their DNC communications director, spewing out whatever she wanted with zero pushback by anchor Sandra Smith. Terrible, considering that Fox couldn't even land a debate. The Dems give them nothing. CNN and MSNBC are all in for the open border socialists or beyond. Fox hires Give Hillary the Questions Donna Brazile, Juan Williams and low ratings Shep Smith. Hopeless and clueless. They should all go the way that they should go all the way left, and I will still find a way to win. That's what I do. Win. Too bad I don't want to win for myself. I only want to win for the people. The new Fox News is letting millions of great people down. We have to start looking for a news outlet. Fox isn't working for us anymore." So this has been building for a while. I've been talking about this, but before I even get to that, it seems patronizing. The language that Donald Trump is using when he tries to explain to people on Twitter that he wants to win for them and that it's all for them. For most people who have sort of like an understanding of the real world, it's the most patronizing and childish way or demeaning way for a 73-year-old president to be speaking to the country. But clearly, this is language that actually does resonate with people. People actually see Trump speak to them in this way via Twitter or speeches or wherever else. And it seems sincere to them and it seems genuine. And that's just a problem, I think, that is a bigger picture issue than Trump even. But let's put that aside for a second. This anti-Fox stuff has slowly been building for the last several months. I've been telling you about it. There's no fixed relationship that's set in stone between Donald Trump and Fox News. You might remember, if we think back to the beginning of the 2016 primary, Fox News was not behind Donald Trump at the beginning of the 2016 Republican primary. They didn't take him seriously. They didn't think he could win. They didn't support him. Trump had some pretty public fights, including with Megyn Kelly and others on Fox News. And Fox News was quite opposed to Donald Trump, and very publicly so. And eventually, I guess Trump, I'm going from memory, Trump sort of reconvened and made up with Megyn Kelly. And eventually Fox News sort of came around to Donald Trump and has been, quite frankly, a pretty effective mouthpiece for Trump for a long time. Trump co-opting numerous Fox News hosts, Jeanine Pirro, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, developing personal relationships with these people, Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business, another example. And it's been a pretty good propaganda mouthpiece for Donald Trump for a while now. But over the last year and a half, sort of every once in a while, a little more over the last year, a little more over the last 6 months. Every once in a while, Shep Smith or Chris Wallace or someone would say something uncontroversially true about Donald Trump that contradicted what Donald Trump had said, or the weekend anchors might do coverage that Donald Trump doesn't like or whatever. And slowly but surely, Donald Trump has been more and more angry with Fox News because even Fox can't keep up the line 100% of the time. That's the truth. They can't placate Trump all the time when all Donald Trump does is lie. And every once in a while, they have to tell the truth. Now, I've also said that Trump, if he turns on Fox News, may well start promoting the even crazier network OAN, One America News, which, if you watch it, looks almost like a porn parody of what a right-wing news channel would look like. But OAN is not joking. OAN is for real. This is my clip talking about this from a few months ago. Fox News is not necessarily going to stick with Trump. They're about profit and right-wing propaganda in a general sense. Trump might be the vehicle for that propaganda, but he also might not. And just to prepare you, if Trump and Fox have a falling out, you need to know that Donald Trump's network of choice is going to become this absolutely whacked out thing called OAN, the One America News Network, or One America News. Check it out online, but not with kids in the room and not close to meal times, because it is truly, it'll turn your stomach. But OAN is where Trump will go if ultimately he abandons Fox News as the propaganda vehicle of choice. And then, of course, about 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump tweeting, "Watching fake news CNN is better than watching Shepard Smith, the lowest rated show on Fox News. Actually, whenever possible, I turn to OANN, One America News Network." So listen, yes, this was written on the wall months ago, and it does seem to be happening. I've said before, we are not going to win in 2020 because of a primary challenge against Trump. We are not going to win in 2020 because Donald Trump gets impeached. We are not going to win in 2020 because Donald Trump turns on Fox News. But every single one of those things could hurt Trump slightly. An impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump would replace coverage of Trump's campaign with coverage of the impeachment inquiry. That might damage Trump half a point in a number of key states. A primary challenge against Donald Trump, which he now has from former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh, and I guess still sort of from former Massachusetts Governor William Weld, although you don't really hear much about that. They're not going to win the primary. But if they get a few points of support from the 20% of Republicans that don't approve of Trump, and then maybe Joe Walsh decides to run as an independent in 2020, maybe it'll siphon off another half point or 1 point or 2 points from Trump in some key state. It's not going to be the sole difference maker that we can count on. And in the same way, if Donald Trump and Fox News part, if Fox remains conservative, but not a pro-Trump 110% of the time propaganda mouthpiece, and instead Donald Trump starts going to promote OAN or whatever, which will have far lower ratings, maybe that also does just a sliver of damage to Trump in some states where it might make a difference. In the end, if we combine all of these things with just getting our base out, half the country doesn't vote. Let's just find people who agree with us and explain to them the importance of voting. All of that together may well lead to Donald Trump's removal. That's my sense right now. And so, listen, I did a stream earlier this week with a former Wall Street financier who now is like an independent trader. And the entire thing struck a lot of people in the audience. Like, this is like very Wall Street center-right stuff. And I've been arguing for a long time, we can simultaneously identify the problems with the system, but also use the tools that the system provides in the best way we can to our advantage. And this is why I think that even though there are so many structural inequalities and problems with our financial system, I still think it's important to be informed about savings accounts, CDs, mutual funds, basic retirement planning and budgeting and all of this stuff, because these are tools that we can use to our advantage. In the exact same way, we need to think of the tools that we have that we can use to our advantage in 2020. I hate the status quo of campaign finance, but it is the status quo right now, and campaign advertising is something that can be effective, so Democrats should do it. The nicknames and branding that Donald Trump has so successfully used. It's childish and it's stupid, but it's not violence, and it is effective if you read the work of George Lakoff. So Democrats should take advantage and try to brand candidates, including Donald Trump, in a similar fashion to how Donald Trump has branded Democrats. And in the exact same way, Trump's primary challengers, all of these different things we're talking about, Trump splitting with Fox News, these can all be little tools that we can try to foment a little bit just to try to gain that advantage, because in the end, it all can contribute to ultimately removing Donald Trump. Make sure that you follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. We will take a quick break and be right back after this.